On today's show, Natasha Howard to the Fever, what else to expect to happen in WNBA Free Agency, how do the Las Vegas Aces look to get better in the front court, and how did the Atlanta Dream become winners of free agency? The Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast, it starts right now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. You are Locked On to Women's Basketball. I'm Jackie Powell, and happy Friday. Happy signing day eve. I am one of your hosts on this program. I cover the New York Liberty at the Next, and I've covered women's basketball and its culture nationally at many other places. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Today, our show is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there is no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5 and you win. You'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And joining me for the first time on Locked On Women's Basketball is the one and only Nekias Duncan from the Dunker Spot. Nekias, how are you? And welcome to the show.
I am doing well. We were talking a little bit offline, but long overdue. It's supposed to be like a playoff thing, then a finals thing, and schedules get crossed. But happy to rock with you. Happy to talk W free agency because, buddy, for it to be the eve of free agency, so much has happened already or is going to happen, it feels like. I'm excited to dig in.
As am I. And so in segment one, we're going to talk about the latest news coming out of Indiana about Natasha Howard and also the Satu Sabally sweepstakes and what could be going on with that. In segment two, we'll then hop on over to the West Coast to talk all things Las Vegas Aces and essentially what their approach has been during this offseason. And then in segment three, a lot about the Atlanta Dream and how they really have been winning free agency. So, all right, Nekias, let's get into it. So Alexa Philippou of ESPN reported this morning that Natasha Howard is returning to the Indiana Fever. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on this, and why does this make sense? Because I think it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, this felt like one of the easier free agency predictions to peg. I wrote an article for Bleacher Report a little bit after the Fever were eliminated from the postseason. And the idea was, what does the ideal offseason look for them? And number one for me on the list was re-signing Kelsey Mitchell in some capacity, whether she disagrees to a deal, if it's the core designation, make sure Kelsey Mitchell stays. Number two for me was signing Natasha Howard. And I understand the quibbles about the three-point shooting or just the jumper in general, as the Fever obviously want to spread you out. But that's veteran experience that you could use in this locker room to take you to the next step. Defensively was not Natasha Howard's best showing last season, like something I've said a bunch on the Dunker Spot. The Wings were like tenths of a point away from having the worst defensive rating in W history last season. It wasn't her best year on that front. It felt like coming back from injury plus what exactly are we doing here type beat. If Natasha Howard bounces back and we get a fully engaged version of her, this is someone with still a high level of defensive versatility, can switch in a pinch, can operate in the drop, can get to the level of screens and force turnovers in that way. It unlocks some lineup versatility for you. Like if you didn't want to play Nalissa Smith at the 5, you can now play Natasha Howard at the 5 in some lineup configurations. So it unlocks that portion, and offensively, someone that's super comfortable in pick and roll, one of the best screeners that we have in the league. And when you're playing with a passer like Caitlin Clark, those pick and roll opportunities are just going to be there. She had quietly a career high in assists last year, so can make short roll reads for you on top of that. And if you stash smaller wings or forwards on her, Natasha Howard can still bully you in the post. So it gives them a bit of a fail safe in the post, especially if Aaliyah Boss is on the bench for, just regular lineup staggering or foul trouble or whatever. You still have that post presence to kind of complement what Caitlin Clark and what Kelsey Mitchell provide. So it feels like a slam dunk to me. And again, if you get the fully engaged version of Natasha Howard defensively, the Fever, I think, finished 11th in defensive rating. Like, you're now flirting with Can they get to 8th? Can they get to 7th? Can they get to 6th? Not world beating, but that combined with the offense that we saw last year really puts the Fever in another tier.
Absolutely. I mean, I will link that story from Bleacher Report to our show notes because you saw the future clearly. And what I find really interesting about this move is it's sort of exactly what Amber Cox said publicly. And so she was on Christina Williams's podcast, in case you missed it, on iHeartRadio.
Great show.
Yeah. And so Christina asked her, so you guys lost Temi Fagbenle, who was really very good, really important to what the Fever were doing. You know, why did that happen? How are you going to fill that hole? And Amber Cox sort of said, well, if our plan goes to play, then it will make a lot of sense. And so essentially what that tells me is this was their plan, because the Fever need a big who can rim run. And when you think about who can run, who calls herself the Flash, that is Natasha Howard. So essentially replacing Temi with Natasha Howard, I mean, that's huge. But moving on, I do want to talk about the Satou Sabally sweepstakes. And so things have gotten very quiet. Obviously, the two teams that were reported to be talking to her were the New York Liberty and the Phoenix Mercury. While this isn't official, I've been hearing rumblings that now it is Phoenix that is in position to land her. Don't know that for sure, but as we know, everything runs through the Dallas Wings. So it could, things are going to take a long time because Dallas wants to get what they want. So Nekias, for you, I guess we could start with Phoenix, but how could you see Satou functioning in Phoenix, especially alongside Alyssa Thomas, Ty Harris, and Kahleah Copper?
I think for me, especially if the shooting for Satou proves to be real, because naturally she missed most of last season. In the second half, when she did make her return to Dallas, she is just knocking down 3 after 3 after 3. She's more comfortable taking pull-ups. And so if the shooting is real, I think there's a real versatility that she brings to this Phoenix group. I think a lot of the offense is going to run through Alyssa Thomas, as it should, as she is a premier playmaker in this league. And I'm super excited about what that means for Kahleah Copper in particular, because I feel like the best version of her has been when she can just attack tilted defenses. When they can stash her in the corner, here's a wide pin down, I can either come off of this hand, I can come off this screen and then get downhill immediately, or if you're overplaying me, I can cut back door and I can trust that whoever's holding the ball at the top of the key can find me. So getting more of that off-ball Kahleah Copper, I think Satou Sabally can operate in that same way. She's someone that can be used as a screener. She can receive screens off the ball. They can invert actions and let her initiate ball screens as well. She's a really good driver. She's comfortable posting up smaller players. I think Phoenix is a team that can really poke at a lot of mismatches here. So I think that's how Satou will slide in. And again, if the jumper is real for her, been shot well from 3 in Dallas last season. She has now been lighting it up and unrivaled, and she is taking all of the pull-ups and knocking all those down. So it seems to be something that feels more real in her game. Is easy to see how you can just kind of move her around the chessboard with Alyssa Thomas, with Kahleah Copper, intertwine them in actions together, and they can just make life incredibly tough for defenses.
Wow. So that, seems, we don't know for sure if Phoenix has won the Satou sweepstakes. I think what I can provide is we haven't heard a lot. Things have been very quiet. Obviously, there will be an ESPN free agency special at 4 p.m. Eastern today, and I'm assuming more will come out during that special. But things have been very quiet, and the reason for that is, as I said before, everything goes through Dallas. And so the Dallas Wings are trying to get exactly what they want. They want to get their best package possible for essentially who has been on and off the best player on their team. So that's why things are taking a long time. The Phoenix Mercury don't have a lot of assets. As we saw in the Alyssa Thomas trade, they gave up players they probably didn't want to give up because they don't really have draft picks. So I imagine this is going to be a 3-team trade. Who knows? Might even be a 4-team trade.
Mm-hmm. It's going to have to expand because, like, as I just think of, I think it's easy to make the on-court fit for Satou Sabally, but the fact that she has to be traded to Phoenix to get there is where I'm just like, what are they going to pull off here? Because in terms of salaries that they have that they may want, like, it's really just Sophie at this point. I guess Sophie and Natasha Mack to like cobble salary together. And as you mentioned, like, they don't have a bunch of picks to toss in. Like, they're not trading Kalia Copper to get that done. That defeats the purpose. So, like, is Sophie plus Natasha Mack plus whatever pick equity they have left, is that enough? And secondarily, or I guess more importantly, is that enough to beat what New York could put on the table? Because I would assume, like, I'm not sourced as you are, but like, I would assume part of this for New York is, one, we don't want to give up our top end stuff to begin with, but two, if our only competition is Phoenix, we just need to make sure our offer is better than theirs. So, like, is New York like, hey, let's see if we can build a package that allows us to keep Benijah Laney Hamilton and Leonie Fevish, and let's build this around like Marquisha Davis and whatever pick stuff we have left. And I can understand Dallas saying, well, no, that's not good enough for us. And I can understand New York saying, okay, get better from Phoenix then. We dare you. And now we just get into the staring match. So I'm also curious to see like how long this drags out and ultimately what the Wings are able to get here.
I mean, Phoenix is even in the mix for Myisha Hines-Allen. You know, Dallas is in the mix for her. LA is in the mix for Myisha Hines-Allen. So that's all what I'm going to be looking at as well. Mm-hmm. Coming up in segment 2, we are going to talk all about the Las Vegas Aces. But first, I do want to talk about our good friends at TurboTax. So this is a message from TurboTax. Taxes were waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. And then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention and they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, and everything with 100% accuracy. All so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. No, this is taxes. Get an expert now at turbotax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed deals at turbotax.com/guarantees. Thank you, TurboTax. And I am back with the one and only Nekias Duncan. Let's get into talking about the Las Vegas Aces. And so my first question for you is obviously their big trade was to get Jewell Loyd. What do you make of her fit with how they currently do things? Can she fit into the Kelsey Plum role, or are the Aces going to have to change some things?
I would imagine there's going to be a little bit of a reimagining of what that 2 role is going to be. Like, I think just from a pure talent perspective, I think Jewell can fit into pretty much everything that Kelsey was asked to do. If we're just thinking broader strokes, I can operate off ball. I can receive off ball screens. I can initiate offense for us. And like when Asia's on the bench, I can help spearhead the second unit with whoever else is flanking me. We'll see what happens with Tiffany Hayes, etc. But broader strokes, like, I think Jewell can fit all of those voids. I do think Jewell and Kelsey are different enough to where this may be more on ball than off ball for Jewell. And I wonder like what kind of balance they find. And like one of the questions that I posed to Steve when we first talked about this trade was, I wonder what level of staggering or what the staggering combinations are going to be for Vegas. Is this going to be Chelsea plus Jewell? So Chelsea can handle most of the playmaking. You can fully unlock Jewell off the ball and you kind of share those duties. Is it going to be Jackie plus Jewell? As we saw a lot of point Jackie last year when Chelsea was out. And again, you can initiate, Jewell can come off ball, attack, tilt to defense, etc. Is it going to be Jewell and Asia? to where we can take some of the scoring burden off of A'ja Wilson. Jewell can do more things with the ball in her hands. You have this built-in two-player action at any given time, and you just kind of flow from there. I think which duo Becky lands on is going to say a lot about how they feel about Jewell in terms of we want you to run the show, or how often we want you to do that. And so like that part is curious to me, but overall, like you are adding a little bit more size in the backcourt. So that should help you defensively, especially if Jewell's locked in. Offensively, again, premier shot taker and maker. The efficiency is going to have to come up. And I think that's where I understand where some of the angst is with bringing Jewell in, as you know, the year before last set the scoring record, but the offensive context wasn't great around her. Last year, the context was better from a talent perspective, like hello Skylar Diggins-Smith, hello Neko Ogwumike, as he gets better, etc. But from a spacing perspective, I don't know how much better it was better, but I don't know how much better it was. And Jewell, on top of that, just did not shoot well for most of the year. And so heading into the Vegas context, I think in terms of the players that she's around, the way Becky spaces the floor specifically, this is probably the best context for Jewell as a scorer that she's had since like the early, late 2010s, early 2020s with Brionna Stewart still there. And so this is solely going to be on, will Jewell knock down shots? Not trying to be too reductive, but this should be an easier context for her to score efficiently in. And if she does, I think the ceiling may be, you could argue that the ceiling's a little bit higher if her defense is better and she can access all three levels as a scorer a little bit more or a little bit better than Kelsey can, as Kelsey is more north-south in that regard. So like there is higher upside, but if the efficiency isn't there, if the defense isn't consistent, there is a world in which the Aces are at a similar level as they were last year or a little bit worse. I don't think that's impossible. I lean towards Jewell is going to make them better. I think she's going to be highly motivated, we'll put it that way, to kind of get people to put more respect on her name in that regard. So I'm curious to see how it shakes out, but those were kind of my early thoughts on the acquisition.
My real big question is about the buy-in. And so you spoke about how she's going to be highly motivated, but does being highly motivated mean a smarter shot selection? You know, a lot of the issue was that it didn't seem like Noelle Quinn got the buy-in that she needed from Jewell Loyd. And obviously we know about the investigation that Annie Costabile reported. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, my question is, will Becky Hammon be successful in getting Jewell Loyd to buy into a specific role with specific parameters? Is this going to be a return to form when it comes to when Jewell Loyd was on the Seattle Storm with Brionna Stewart and Sue Bird? Roles were very clear. There was not a lot of gray area. So that's really what I'm going to be looking for. Now, besides Jewell Loyd, it seems very clear to me that the Las Vegas Aces are trying to pair A'ja Wilson with another big who defenses are not going to not guard. They want to give A'ja Wilson a better front court partner offensively than Kia Stokes. They realized in the postseason for the second year in a row that defenses just didn't want to guard her, and they could clog the Aces offense in other ways. So I guess what I want to know from you quickly before we move on is, I guess, what is the ideal big that Vegas needs? I mean, we know they were in the hunt to get Brittney Griner, but because of a salary cap issue, it didn't seem like they had enough to give her.
I think, to your point, like they want someone that that defenses have to respect as a scorer a little bit more. And so that's where you mentioned Brittney Griner being linked. This is where Callie Finn of the Las Vegas Review-Journal mentioned Cheyenne Parker-Tyus as another player that they're looking at. And Cheyenne may be willing to take a little bit less to, as similar to Jewell, hey, put some respect on my name. Like, this was a wonky year last year in Atlanta in a weird context. The year before that, I was an all-star. Like, I can still kind of do this. And so if you're thinking of like a Cheyenne and A'ja pairing together, I am curious to see which version of Cheyenne we get. because I think she is still someone that can win on post up. She can face up and drive. The jumper has been kind of inconsistent. So if you're thinking about pure floor spacing, I don't think she gets Nekias Stokes coverage, but teams are going to be like, they're going to be okay with her shooting. And so like seeing what level she lands on there was going to be interesting. And defensively, which version of Cheyenne are we going to get? We have seen solid, active Cheyenne. We've also seen apathetic Cheyenne. And I think that led to some of the Tanisha Wright. Hey, how about you come sit next to me? Let's go with Nas. Let's go with Nia. Tina Charles is working hard. Let's do this if this is where the defense is going to be. So I think, again, similar vein to Jewell, she'll be highly motivated to be the best version of herself. And I think if you are flanking her with A'ja Wilson, who is one of the best defenders on the planet, that certainly takes a little bit of the pressure off. So looking at Cheyenne, that makes sense. In terms of ideal, like I made the tweet before the Kelsey Plum trade actually went down. It's like, hey, if I'm the Aces, even if they say no, I'm seeing if I can get Azurá Stevens out of this. Like, is there something we can work out to where Azurá is someone that can knock down shots, can drive from the perimeter, like that kind of inside-out threat to pair with A'ja? That's what I would be looking for. If we're looking trade candidates, I'm at least calling Washington to see what it takes to get Stephanie Dolson. That's a bomber that can spread the floor for A'ja and could take on some of those center assignments so A'ja could be more of a roamer defensively. Again, both of those, like, there was no Azurá deal, and the Mystics may decide, no, we don't want to move her at all because she's important to what we're trying to build, or another team has come calling and we have more to offer than the Aces do. But those are the types of bigs I would be looking at.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the Aces have historically been very interested in wanting to pair A'ja with Stephanie Dolson. They tried for her in 2022, but she went to the New York Liberty instead. And, you know, when we talk about trades, what's difficult for the Aces, similarly to Phoenix, is there are not a lot of assets to work with here. So what would that mean? That would mean trading Kirsten Bell, trading a first-round draft pick that they just acquired in the Kelsey Plum trade. Like, what would that mean?
I think it's exactly what you said, honestly. And I guess that's where I'm curious generally about like what Stephanie Dolson's trade value is in particular. Like as a vet, I don't think she's going to garner like 3 first-round picks, but how many picks do the Mystics want? Like conceptually, hey, we may be in a rebuild or retooling period, but like logistically, we already have 2 first-round picks already. They have 4 and 6. How many young players do we want on the roster? How many young players will make the roster? Because the reality of the W is still there are only so many roster spots, et cetera. So there may be a bit of diminishing returns in terms of like a pick-based package for someone like Stephanie Dolson. So I don't know. Like, again, it's up to the Aces. They at least need to try. They should say, we called, we asked, we offered this. They said no. I would be disappointed if they didn't even try to get on the phone.
I mean, I guess I just wonder, do they try to sign Tina Charles? I mean, I know that sounds wild, but she is someone who, I guess, maybe is that a similar thought to Cheyenne Parker-Tyus? You know, you have someone who can shoot from 3, who, you know, does bring defenses out. But then again, the Aces look for something very, very particular culturally. So that might not be the way to go either. All right. Well, coming up in our final segment, we will discuss the Atlanta Dream and how they have just become the winners of free agency, but maybe with a caveat or two. But we'll discuss that coming up. But first, I do want to talk to you all about our good friends at FanDuel. So Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, That's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Thank you very much, FanDuel. And we are back here on Locked On Women's Basketball. Nekias Duncan of the Dunker Spot is here. So in this third segment, we have to talk about the Atlanta Dream, who just landed 2 centers in Brittney Griner and Brionna Jones. Both were reported by ESPN before signing day. And so I guess my reaction to this was, that's great, but how does it work on the floor?
Like, that was one of the, I guess, less of a how does it work for me and more of a how does this fit with the vision that I was anticipating Atlanta trying to lean into. Because I feel like some of the concern that Dream fans or Dream media or whatever the case may be was with Atlanta's offense. Like, how many advantages can we generate? How many threes are we taking considering who we have on the roster, et cetera? And so to have that in the back of my mind, to bring in Carl Smesco's team, his teams have been very good. His teams have been very good offensively. They want to get up and down the floor. And then your first 2, or I guess technically 2 of your first 3 signings, shout out to Shatori Walker-Kimbrough, who I think that's a wonderful value add for Atlanta, considering what they got from their backup guards last year. But your first 2 signings are Bree Jones, who is post first, can do other things, but wants to get her business done inside the arc. And Brittney Griner, who is comfortable taking a step out and knocking down some threes, but ultimately she wants to do her work on the inside. So I was like, is this what Carl Smesco wants? Like, I think you want to add talent, obviously, but is this fitting his vision? But then kind of went back and forth. Like, the mark of a great coach is you have your ideals, but being flexible, being able to be successful anyway. And so I am intrigued by adding these 2. Like, Steve and I talked about this on the pod a little bit earlier. He made the point, like, hey, we had Tina Charles and Cheyenne Parker-Tyus last year. What if we just upgrade both of those spots with Brittney Griner and Bree Jones? It's like, well, you put it that way, that makes sense. I'm curious to see if those 2 start together. But if they do, there is high-low potential. There's something that Steve hit on the pod as well. But, like, there is high-low potential for either one of those. Brittney Griner is a good passer. Bree Jones also a solid passer. So you can set up 2-player actions there to get those quick post-ups in the middle of the floor. Defensively is where it gets interesting to me, especially if you are playing them or starting them together. I would imagine this means Brittney Griner in a drop, though, because of the players around Bree Jones and Brittney Griner. Jordan Canada, especially when healthy, one of the best point of attack defenders in the league. Alicia Gray, just one of the best perimeter defenders in the league, period. Ryan Howard, when fully engaged, she is terrifying off the ball as someone that can swoop in, generate deflections and steals, can get weak side blocks, etc. Is there room for Atlanta to say, actually, Bree Jones, as the Sun experimented with last year, how about you get to the level of the screen? We want you to play higher up on the floor. Let's see if you can force some turnovers. If they get the pass behind you anyway, that is Brittney Griner at the rim, space Brittney Griner elsewhere. We got Ryan Howard, we got Alicia Gray, we got Jordan Canada. Like, all 3 of those players are comfortable kind of mucking things up and playing passing lanes. Can Atlanta get aggressive defensively? This turns into a turnover forcing defense. And now they get to get out in transition. And now you're dealing with Brittney Griner trailer threes, Bree Jones, who is incredibly good at running the floor and getting those steals in transition and forcing fouls, who, you know, on that note, the Atlanta Dream, even last year, one of the top teams in the league in terms of free throw rate. They got to the line a ton. Now you're adding Bree Jones, who can bully you, and Brittney Griner, who will bully you, to that mix. They could just win possessions that way. And so, not a perfect fit, but you think about it, there are avenues to where you can make this work on both ends.
That's fascinating. I mean, I need to watch a little bit more of what BG has been able to do on the perimeter when it comes to that 3-point shot. I mean, I've seen her hit them, but is that reliable enough? I guess I just don't know, because I thought in the ideal world, you would want to surround one of those centers with a bunch of shooters. And I was like, okay, Brittney Griner with Jordan Canada, Alicia Gray, Ryan Howard, and Nia Coffey. And BG's I mean, that to me made a lot of sense. So, but before we go, I do want to say that these type of couple of blockbuster signings for the Atlanta Dream, this has been a long time coming. This is what Dan Powdover had imagined. And, you take a look at the Dream's track record. They got Jordan Canada, who was a highly sought out free agent, last free agency. They got Alicia Gray in a trade with the Dallas Wings, another very highly sought out player. And so the Atlanta Dream are a very, I guess, what word do I use? They are a team that players want to go to. I know we talk about New York and Vegas and Phoenix as sort of the top dogs in the league, but the Atlanta Dream have a better player experience than I believe they are given credit for. And so the fact that you see these two very talented all-star centers deciding on Atlanta over other teams, that means something. So, thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen today. I want to give a huge thank you to Nekias Duncan of the Dunker Spot podcast. Nekias, where can people find your great work?
You can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Nekias NBA. Obviously, subscribe to the Dunker Spot podcast, NBA and WNBA content pretty much year round. We don't take a break because we just love basketball. So if that's your vibe, come rock with us. We are doing online watch parties via playback. So if you have a League Pass subscription, you can watch NBA games alongside us. But other than that, like, we're watching Unrivaled as well. We are watching wrestling. We are doing video game stuff. Like, we kind of bounce around, do a bunch of randomness, but it is a basketball room at the end of the day. So if you want to watch hoops with us, we do breakdowns. We also let our hair down, sprinkle in some jokes and stuff. So it's just a cool place to be. Those will probably be the primary places. And like, I'm doing WNBA and Unrivaled writing for Bleacher Report as well. So we'll have more stuff coming out soon on that front. But I think that does it for me.
That's great. And we'll have all of those links in the show notes. Well, everyone, enjoy WNBA Free Agency. I'm sure tomorrow things will be popping even more than they are right now. Anyway, this has been Jackie Powell and
Nekias Duncan.
And have a great weekend, everyone.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.